Let's now have a look at the Textarea component. Under the inputs, we are going to create a new directory, and we're going to call it Textarea. And within this directory, we're going to create a new view file called exactly the same way. So Textarea. Now, before we do anything else, let's open components.js, and we are going to add a new line. We are going to call this one text-area, and it will come from within the Textarea directory. And the file is also called Textarea. If we save and close it. Now, rather than typing in the template, I'm just going to copy and paste it. Most of the things in this template are very similar to what we've already done. I will go through the differences, but before we do anything else, let's import our base input. So import base input from, and we're going one level up, base input, and let's add it as a mixin. So mixins base input. Okay, so now we have more properties and methods available to us. Now, the wrapper is the same as for any other input. Then we have a slot for validation. As you can see, I have used named slot, which means it will allow us to put more than one slot into the component, because by default, you can only have a single default slot, which means if we were to put content through the opening closing tag of this component, we would only be able to put either validation or the content for this input. But because we need both, we need the functionality where we can actually specify validation and the content for this input. That's why we are using named slots. So we have slot with the name validation, and if we open our views, main and index.blade, you'll see that I've already added Textarea to the view, and you'll see that I also have slot with the name body. I will not put it inside of the template, but I will specify that this specific content, this div, and whatever's inside of this div is referring to the slot with the name body. So then I can obtain the content for that slot from within the code. So that's why we're using the named slots here. All the other attributes, properties of this validation component you are already familiar with, so I'm not going to be going through this. Then we have this text area, and again, ID, identity, name, and all those default properties. Then we have input CSS style, which will be the computed property, as well as input listeners, which we don't have within this component yet. Obviously, input listeners will just react to all the events on that input. Okay, so starting properties, we will need just one. We want to say how high our text area should be. So let's specify the height property, and it will be of the type string, and then default value, I'm going to specify it as 7 rems. Then for the data, we will have, just scroll up a little bit, we will have current body. And this current body will check if these slots have a slot with the body name. And if it does, then we're going to use it. So this slots, we're going to go for body at index 0. Then we want to go for children at index 0, and we want to obtain its text. That's what's going to give us the content of this slot with the name body. Otherwise, what we are going to do is simply return an empty string. So this current body will be just an empty string. Then body is the model that we're going to be using with our text area, as you can see here. So next thing we need to do is the computed section, some computed properties. And for computed properties, we are going to have this input listeners as well. I'm just going to create this first, as well as this input CSS style. Okay, let's start with this input listeners. Input listeners, we're going to return object, and we use assign method, empty object, and then we're going to take default listeners, so this listeners, and we are going to merge them. Assign should be GN, obviously. And we are going to combine it with input. On input, what I want to do is execute the function which will emit whatever is associated with the body model body property on this specific component. So when the input is when someone's typing into the input, each keystroke will fire this emit event, and that in return will update the form wrapper with the current value typed into this specific component. Okay, so that's our input listeners. And then for the input CSS style, what we're going to return will be an object. Height will set to this height. So whatever property we've passed through on that component. And for the methods, actually, before we do the methods, let's go for the mounted. So when the component is mounted and DOM is now available, we're going to emit. Straight away, we associate body property with this current body, and we're going to emit it. So when the component loads, that straight away emits the event with the value we have within this input, and that obviously updates the form wrapper. Then we just call initialize as well as register listeners. So this register listeners. And then for the methods, all we need to do is provide implementation for reset and clear. So reset will be simply this emit, this body equals this current body. And as you can see, we are repeating ourselves because this first line does exactly the same. So why don't we change this to simply reset? And then we're gonna go for clear, and clear will be this emit, this body equals an empty string. So we are associating the value with this property as well as emitting it at the same time. So that's pretty much everything within our component. Now if we save it and let's recompile all the files, and if we preview everything in a browser, you can see we have this excerpt field now on the left hand side, excerpt input. If we start typing, and there you can see this is automatically updating as well. We can remove everything, and if we hit reset, that goes back. Obviously, if we add anything, hit reset, that resets, clears as well as it should. Okay, so that's our Textarea component. In the next video, we are going to tackle CK editor integration.